Hey team, this is Coach Paul. Wanted to do a mini seminar on treating the primary and reinforcing mechanics of joint locks. Reinforcing, amplifying, magnifying. Still haven't found the term that I really truly like, but we're going to take a look at the basic concepts and go through some different examples and talk about it in more detail. So, primary and reinforcing mechanics. Think about how a joint works, right? It can bend, and a lot of submissions will take advantage of that. Wrist locks, arm bars, we hyperextend by bending the joint farther than it's designed to go. So, whatever is going to cause the submission is what we're going to call our primary mechanics. So in the case of the twisting joint locks, right, we're twisting the joint. That primary mechanic is a twist. So we've got a bend, we've got a twist, and most of the joint locks are going to take that form. It's going to be some kind of a bend or some kind of a twist in order to break something. Now, what are the other things that can happen to a joint, regardless of which joint it is? The other thing that we can do is to expand the joint. So we can, if I pull on my wrist, there's a little bit of expansion there. If I pull here, there's a little bit of expansion on my elbow. Well, let's get right into Kimura. There's a perfect example of where our primary mechanics are
rotational,
right? And let's take a look at what our secondary mechanics are. We don't have very many choices, so let's go through it. So here I am, and Timmy's made a dramatic mistake, and I've got my Kimura, okay? So I could, from right here, I can twist. And that's a lot of motion there, very tapped, okay? Now, what were our reinforcing mechanics? We were talking about, what other things? Well, it's kind of hard to bend this joint, right? It's already very bendy, very mobile, so bending isn't going to be the answer. And compressing is going to be very awkward because every time I compress, he can just move away from me. So that's not really going to add any pressure to it. But what I've got is this nice closed guard, and I can pull his arm off of his body by extending his hips away. Now I've got something that, just putting that extra pressure on him, tighten things up so much that his weak shoulders, that was enough to get him to tap. Let's take it down a notch. I'm going to pull. And now I've done my secondary or my reinforcing mechanics, and now I can add in my primary mechanics, which is a twist. Much, much less motion. So it's the difference between not pulling his arm off and having up to there to get the finish, or adding extra tension and getting the finish that way.
my weak shoulders.
So, what did you feel the difference between those two?
It was awful. As soon as you start putting that, expanding that shoulder joint, feels like my joint is essentially locked. So there's no more range of motion in it anymore. So as soon as you apply that twist, that primary finish, it's instant.
Did you feel more immobilized?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
So let's just get back in position. So here's one of the other things that crops up here is you'll see a lot of people talk about how important it is to get off to the side and get here and get up on top of the back. Well, one of the reasons that we do that type of thing is to make it so that if he tries to posture up, he's working against our weight too. And there's a limit to how much he can posture up. If I'm just here and I'm not pulling on his arm and he postures up, Yeah, you can start getting into some defensive positions. If I extend, can you posture up?
No, I can't move.
Yeah, I literally can't feel any upward motion at all. So I immobilized him not by putting weight down on top of him. I immobilized him by making his joints so tight that it was literally, if he moved, he was going to submit himself. And that's what we want. We want them to be basically in a position where if they do anything, it's going to make it worse. All right, so applying these reinforcing mechanics before you do anything else, before you try to get the submission, that is what gives us basically more control over the situation. It hurts them to try to resist. Whereas if I had started with the twist and then to try to add on the pull, yes, it can work, but I already would have given him a lot more ability to, he had more range of motion, so he would have been able to posture up, right? All right, so another example is from the triangle armbar, okay? So he screwed up, he let me get my triangle set up, but he maintained that posture, right? If I get on here and try to do my armbar, wow, that's really hard. It actually wasn't even really working all that well. Well, guess what? It's because when his thumb is up here, when his arm is in front of him, his thumb up is a bad thing. I need to have at least his palm up. So let's get his palm up the way it's supposed to be. Hug that in nice and tight. We go up, and there it is. But the whole time I'm doing that, he has more ability to let his elbow drift off to the side, right? If I'm pulling on it, oh, that's no good. So, primary mechanics is the bend. If I just get everything in place and I try to hyperextend his elbow, it can work and does work. But let's pick one of the other joint mechanics, right? What are our choices? We've got expanding. We know that compressing isn't really going to work. That's just going to help him. So we can try expanding. We can also try twisting, right? So let's see what happens. I'm going to not wrist lock you this time. We're just going to turn his wrist as much as we can. Look at that face. Look at the face. Right? This sucks. It's not wrist locking him, but it is adding a bunch of pressure to that elbow. So now, when I start to hip up, yeah, right? So I added on those. I was very, very serious about getting those secondary, or those reinforcing mechanics. Thank you. Just do that in my ear. I do those reinforcing mechanics first, and it makes the primary mechanics take a lot less work, right? But there's no reason I couldn't add even more reinforcing mechanics. We know, like what we're going to show in a minute, when we do an armbar, if we can expand the joint, that's also going to do it. So let's turn his hand up. Right? I'm not trying to turn as much as I can this time. Now I just have the hand up. I'm going to do everything I can to expand the joint. So there we are. The joint's expanded. How's your elbow feel right now?
Feels great, Coach. I'm very excited about this.
Good, good, good. All right, so it's expanded. I haven't turned his wrist more. Ooh, that's almost there. So you can see that it's not quite at the end. We go here, hip up, compared to palm up, hip up. And you can see it in his face. He wears the submissions all over his face. So if nothing else, do this to watch them suffer. All right, so the arm bar from mount, we end up here. We want to hyperextend. Now here, we're not going to try to twist this. That doesn't really make any sense, right? And it's going to be too hard. But what we can do is we can expand the joint. So if I just do a normal arm bar from here, man, you've got long arms. If I just do a normal arm bar from here, I sit back, my legs are tight, I go back, I go back, I go back. And there, just before my shoulders hit the ground, I got the tap. And it wasn't until I was most of the way there that you started feeling like there was a problem, right? So his arm's in exactly the same place. I haven't let it slide. It's not smoke and mirrors. I'm now going to spend my time thinking about expanding it on him because he's tall. I'm actually going to have to really expand my chest up and get up high here. Now I'm going to sit back. How'd that?
Yeah, that's significant.
So it came on sooner.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, how'd you feel about the escape opportunities?
Definitely much more limited.
Right, you'd rather escape out of the first one than the second one.
Right, for sure.
Right, because if he's trying to escape, he's trying to escape his elbow, he's trying to get another arm involved, but if I'm stretching that whole thing out, it's already uncomfortable. So by going after those reinforcing mechanics, I'm, again, immobilizing. All right, here we are getting ready to do a knee bar, okay? So I've got everything exposed, these knees right where I want to be. Everything's cool here. Got this nice hug, right? So look, we've got this. If I hip in, okay, I got the tap. But here's the thing. Could I twist here? Maybe, but he can kind of twist too. So every bit of twist I do here, now I'm actually changing the angle of the knee in order to try to add twist. So the twisting doesn't look like an answer here. So what can I do? That means if I'm trying to hyperextend, my secondary mechanics can only be expansion or contraction. So if I'm like totally buried on his knee, right? My hips are close to his hips. That means there's no harm in trying to compress the knee. And in this case, I've got this big meaty thing that I'm clamping onto, right? I can help immobilize him. I've got my heels helping me to control him. So I can compress his knee. Do you feel extra pressure there?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I haven't done any hyperextending at all. All I've done is compress the knee and then hip in, and I barely moved. Right? Let's take a look at, so from here, if you want to spin, I'm clamping on nice and tight. How much can you move your knee? Try to turn like towards the ground. Or that. Yeah, he's turning a little bit, or maybe try to bring your knee up in the air. A little bit, yeah. I mean, I can still break his knee here, even though he's turning a little bit, that kind of thing, but it's not going to be as efficient as I'd like. As soon as I start clamping on it and pushing into it, how much can you move around now?
Not at all.
Does it feel like it's adding pressure every time you move?
Absolutely.
And there we go, right? So one of the hallmarks of these reinforcing mechanics is that when you apply them, they're not enough to submit the person, right? That's why they're reinforcing mechanics. But what they do is they immobilize, and they also add more tension in some way to the joint. And all that extra tension makes it so that when we go to do our primary braking mechanics, they're a lot more efficient. All right, so no matter what the submission is on joints, we want to look for ways to basically apply that extra pressure. We want to immobilize them. We want to take their range of motion away. And when we do that, then the primary mechanics become something that there's hardly any movement. You don't even look like you're doing anything, right? When you feel the difference between these two, it's a radical change in your view of how do we make this submission even worse. And when we first started going over this, how was it for you when you started like adding in the reinforcing mechanics? And I mean, it was always kind of like a bit informal, because like that thing with expanding the elbow, I've been doing that since you started.
Yeah.
But like adding on the knee, adding on the Kimura, like that closed guard Kimura, some of those are a little bit more recent. And have you been able to use that for other things? Have you explored the idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of in the, especially in the context of what's going to help immobilize the joint. You know, instead of just trying to attack and look at it in the context of, okay, well, especially with expanding the arm on that arm bar, using that in a lot of different situations. So even like that far side arm bar and side control, you tighten that up, it restricts the joint from moving even more. So exploring them as not necessarily even just breaking the mechanics, but like you said, immobilizing mechanics as well. What's going to add tension to what we're trying to attack.
Right,
Makes a significant difference.
And that comes back to one of the things I always say, is control above all else. So even when we're submitting somebody, we're still thinking about control. And the more we think about that control, the more we think about immobilization, the more we tighten things up, all of a sudden the submissions become it's easy.
Yeah.
In fact, it's often very surprising. You're not ready for the tap.
Yeah.
They tap a lot earlier than you think. It just doesn't feel like you're doing any work. Now, there's a lot of times, like in that knee compression, there's a lot of times where you feel like, man, this is a lot of work. These reinforcing mechanics feel like I'm doing a lot of work. Wouldn't it be just easier to go after the primary mechanics? I mean, yes and no. The problem is that focusing on those reinforcing mechanics first, it helps to immobilize and it reduces their options. So even though it feels like it's taking a little bit more effort up front, and it is, it's worth it. It gives us something that's a lot more controlled. There's less motion. Less motion means less chances of the person getting hurt. They feel the warning signs a lot sooner.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you feel it as soon as that joint starts expanding or twisting, and you're like, I better pay attention to this, and you start to move around, you're like, I can't move either. Then the finish is just, it just kind of happens.
I found even if you don't do the reinforcing mechanic 100%, so the Kimura from closed guard, you don't have to extend them so far away that they literally can't move. But you add that extra tension, and even if you're snapping into that finish, you know, you're going to get the finish more quickly. So there's varying degrees of addressing those reinforcing mechanics that will still have a pretty significant effect on the efficiency on the finish.
Sure. And that also brings us into like competition. You know, in competition, in here, I absolutely encourage everybody to do the reinforcing mechanics first and spend your time, because that's part of the control phase. That's part of making sure that they can't escape. So we can afford to take time on that. It will help us learn, okay, what avenues do they have to escape? What am I leaving loose? And then when it comes time to do the submission, even you get some yahoo that comes in and thinks he's a monster, you immobilize him and just gradually apply that submission. If they can't move, you're a lot safer with them. You're taking a lot less risk to them, and also a lot less risk to you, because now they're not trying to flop around, right? But when it comes to competition, there's going to be less of that 1-2 step, right? We're just going to, they're going to be doing it to you. So you kind of have to do it to them. You're not going to have the luxury of people being decent to each other. You need to look at it more in terms of, okay, yes, I'm still, like if I get the Kimura from closed guard, I'm going to pull and start twisting more or less at the same time. If I'm doing a triangle arm bar, I'm going to be doing my best to continue twisting, but I need to start adding that upward pressure. So the spacing will be a lot closer together. I'm still going to try to do the secondary mechanics first, because again, if it's good for control, it's just plain a good thing. But I'm not going to have any kind of a pause. I'm not going to be saying, okay, just how slow and how little motion can I put into the submission? It's going to be more a case of, okay, everything's here, tight, like you're going into a heel hook. Yeah, you're going to clamp on, hip up, and start turning more or less, almost all at the same time. But that's competition. In here, we're not training to win. We're training to learn. And focusing on control is how we do that. When we start making the adjustments for competition, that's a different story. But you're not going to just be able to do all those things correctly by saying, oh, we're just going to do competition with it all the time. Everybody's going to get hurt, and it's not going to be as effective. You'll find that the higher you go in the ranks, the more you try to do things all at once like that in like training, people know what's going on, and they're going to specifically make it harder for you to get both the primary and the reinforcing mechanics. So you have to, it's worth spending more time on those reinforcing mechanics. You have any questions about any of this or any other observations? Okay.
That's my level of understanding of the two of these. Same.
All right, so next time you're on the mats, try it out. Try some of these submissions, or ask me or Coach Rick about any of, what are the other potentials. But it's always going to come back to those 4 joint mechanics. We can bend, we can twist, we can expand, and we can compress. So that's your palette. That's what you have to work with. The answer is going to be, well, what's my primary, the thing that breaks the joint, and then the other 3 can get mixed into varying levels. Not all 3, because you can't compress and expand at the same time. But sometimes you can have an additional 2. So play around with it, ask questions, and explore the concept. As long as you're spending your time working on the reinforcing mechanics, it's very, very, very difficult to hurt somebody. There's a lot of times where I'm doing the secondary mechanics and I feel like I'm using every ounce of energy in my body, but they're not quite there. It's only when I apply the primary mechanics that's enough. Occasionally, like in the case of the more from closed guard, you will run into people with tighter shoulders or stuff like that. So you still need to be prepared for them to start tapping before you ever get into the primary mechanics. But in general, going through these reinforcing mechanics first is just very, very safe. All right. Cool. All right, it's cool. That how we think about joint mechanics has made a big difference in my jiu-jitsu, and it's also helped me analyze when I look at somebody else doing the submissions or teaching about submissions, I can look at that and I can also say, hey, maybe I can make it a little bit better. Or maybe, they're utilizing this aspect of those primary and reinforcing mechanics. Pay attention to the details. Look for those 4 variations of the joint lock mechanics in every joint lock you do, and play around with it. It'll be good for you.